It was a bright and peaceful summer afternoon in Ottawa, Ontario, on August 6, 2003. The air was warm, the skies clear, and the city seemed to move at its usual calm pace. For 27-year-old Ardeth Wood, it was the perfect day to do what she loved most: spend time outdoors, surrounded by nature. Ardeth was a kind, intelligent young woman, known for her gentle nature and her deep love for books and the environment. She had a passion for learning and was pursuing her studies at the University of Waterloo, where she excelled in her academics. She came from a loving, close-knit family who admired her curiosity and warm spirit. That Wednesday, Ardeth decided to take a relaxing bike ride along the Ottawa River, a route she often used to clear her mind. She told her family she planned to cycle through the trails near Relentless Parkway, an area filled with trees, winding paths, and scenic views of the river. It was meant to be a quiet, peaceful afternoon. Just Ardeth, her bike, and her favorite book. But as evening approached and the sun began to dip below the horizon, Ardeth still hadn't returned home. At first, her family thought she might have stopped to read or take a longer ride. But as the minutes turned into hours and her phone remained silent, her parents' worry grew. Before we continue, welcome to Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button to stay updated on the latest true crime cases we uncover. And to our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to like this video so it reaches more people who care about the truth behind the headlines. I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. So back to the case. By nightfall, that worry had turned into panic. Ardeth was responsible, careful, and always kept in touch. It wasn't like her to vanish without a word. Her parents immediately reported her missing to the Ottawa police, and soon, search teams were mobilized. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers joined in, bringing flashlights, dogs, and maps of the wooded area. The trails along the parkway were combed through again and again. People called out her name, hoping for any sound in return. A cry, a rustle, anything. But the woods were silent. Then, a chilling discovery was made. Along a quiet section of the Relentless Parkway, searchers found Ardeth's bicycle lying abandoned by the path. Her water bottle and a book, the one she had taken for her afternoon reading, were still inside the bike's basket. It looked as if she had stopped for just a moment and then disappeared. There were no signs of a struggle nearby, no torn clothing, no blood, no footprints that led away. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The discovery sent waves of fear through everyone who knew her. In the following days, the community came together like never before. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Police helicopters hovered overhead, scanning the dense trees from above. Boats patrolled the riverbanks, and divers searched the nearby water. Posters with Ardeth's photo were plastered across Ottawa. Her smiling face now a haunting reminder of a young woman who should have been safe on a sunny day. But as days turned into weeks, and still no trace of her was found, hope began to fade. Her family clung to each other, refusing to give up, but deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. The once lively forest now felt dark and sinister, holding a secret no one could yet uncover. And then, 2 weeks later, that secret finally surfaced, in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. 2 long weeks had passed since Ardeth Wood vanished, and her family was living through what felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Every morning began with hope, and every night ended in tears. Despite the exhaustive search efforts, there had been no sign of her. Then, on August 20th, 2003, everything changed. That morning, 2 people walking through a wooded area off the Relentless Parkway, not far from where Ardeth's bike had been found, stumbled upon something horrifying. Beneath a thick patch of bushes, they discovered a body. Police were immediately called to the scene, and the area was quickly sealed off. The air grew heavy with tension as officers and forensic experts examined the site. Even before the official confirmation, everyone feared the worst, that the search for Ardeth had come to a tragic end. Later that day, their fears were confirmed. The remains were identified as those of 27-year-old Ardeth Wood. The news shattered her family and the entire Ottawa community. The woman they had spent weeks searching for, the one they had prayed would return safely, had been brutally taken from them. Investigators revealed that Ardeth's body was found partially concealed by brush and branches, in a secluded spot deep within the woods. It appeared she had been the victim of a violent attack. Though police didn't release all the details immediately, it was clear that she had fought for her life. The discovery turned the missing persons case into a full-scale homicide investigation. Detectives from the Ottawa Police Major Crime Unit began working around the clock, retracing every step of her final day, determined to find whoever had done this. Her father described her as a light in their lives, a person full of kindness and ambition. Her mother could hardly speak to reporters without breaking down. The grief was raw, but beneath it all was a quiet, burning need for justice. Someone out there had ended Ardeth's life, and the police were determined to find that person. But what investigators didn't yet know was that her killer had been hiding in plain sight all along, and his past would reveal a chilling pattern of violence that went far beyond what anyone expected. With the discovery of Ardeth Wood's body, the case shifted into overdrive. What had started as a desperate search for a missing woman was now a murder investigation. The Ottawa Police Major Crime Unit gathered every resource they had. Detectives, forensic teams, and analysts worked day and night, determined to piece together the truth. The first priority was the crime scene. Forensic experts scoured every inch of the wooded area near the Rockcliffe Parkway. They collected samples of soil, hair, fibers, and anything that could point to the killer. Investigators found signs of a struggle: flattened grass, disturbed soil, and broken branches. It was clear Ardeth had fought back fiercely. Her bicycle, which had been found earlier near the path, was re-examined. Detectives believed she had been attacked shortly after stopping in that area. There were no witnesses to the assault itself, but the police received reports from several women who had encountered a man on the trails that same day. Each of their accounts sent chills down investigators' spines. One young woman said a man had approached her while she was biking alone, trying to start a conversation and insisting she follow him into the woods. She refused, sensing something wasn't right. Another described a man on a mountain bike who wouldn't stop circling near her, giving her a bad feeling. A third woman reported a similar experience, a stranger trying to lead her away from the main path. All of them gave roughly the same description: a man in his 20s, of average height and build, with short brown hair and a tattoo of an eagle on his shoulder. It was enough to create a composite sketch which police released to the public. The drawing spread quickly across the city, posted on walls, broadcast on news stations, and shared by frightened residents. Tips began to pour in. Some callers thought they had seen the man near the bike paths before. Others mentioned co-workers or neighbors who looked similar. Detectives followed every lead, knocking on doors, questioning people, and running background checks on dozens of potential suspects. Still, nothing stuck. For weeks, the case hit a standstill. No fingerprints, no DNA match, no eyewitness who could directly link anyone to Ardeth's death. Detectives grew frustrated, but they refused to give up. The case had struck a deep chord in Ottawa, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of who Ardeth was. A kind, intelligent woman whose life had been senselessly stolen. The media kept the pressure on, running daily stories about the investigation. Residents called for justice, and women across the city changed their routines, avoiding trails, never walking alone, and constantly looking over their shoulders. The once bustling park had become a place of fear. Behind the scenes, police were building files on anyone who even remotely matched the composite sketch. They compared work schedules, addresses, and phone records. Dozens of men were questioned, and some even volunteered DNA samples to clear their names. But one name, one face, seemed to keep slipping through the cracks. It wasn't until years later that investigators would realize the man responsible for Ardeth's death had already been in their system, not once, but several times. And his story was darker than they could have imagined. For 2 long years, the Ardeth Wood case remained unsolved. Detectives continued to hope for a lead that could finally reveal the person responsible. Then, Unexpectedly, a chillingly similar incident occurred, not in Ottawa, but in North Bay, about 190 miles away. A woman told police that a man had approached her late at night, asking her to walk him home. He said he needed help because he had just moved from Ottawa and couldn't find his new address. The woman, cautious but kind, refused and tried to point him in the right direction. But instead of leaving, he followed her. Moments later, he grabbed her and tried to drag her into the bushes. She screamed as he struck her, fighting for her life. Her cries were heard by nearby residents. One man even rushed outside armed with a shovel, scaring the attacker off before he could do more harm. In his panic, the man dropped his cell phone while fleeing the scene. That single mistake changed everything. Police quickly traced the phone and arrested the suspect, a 25-year-old man named Christopher Myers. He had recently moved to North Bay from Ottawa. As detectives built their case against him, one officer couldn't shake a feeling of déjà vu. He remembered attending a police briefing years earlier about the unsolved murder of Ardeth Wood. Curious, he pulled out the old case files and the composite sketch that had been distributed at the time. The resemblance between the sketch and Christopher Myers was uncanny, almost identical. Without wasting time, he contacted the Ottawa police, urging them to take a closer look at this new suspect. Investigators there began digging into Christopher's background. What they found left them stunned. It turned out that police had already questioned Christopher shortly after Ardeth disappeared. Back then, an anonymous caller had named him as a possible suspect. Detectives followed up on the tip, but couldn't find enough evidence linking him to the crime. In fact, he seemed to have an alibi. The woman he lived with told police she saw him at home that afternoon, and his work records showed he started his shift by 3 p.m. Since Ardeth was believed to have been attacked around 1:30 p.m., it appeared he didn't have time to commit the crime and make it to work, so the case against him was quietly dropped. But a year later, another anonymous tip came in naming him again. This time, detectives decided to bring him in for questioning. Christopher denied everything. He even lifted his shirt to show investigators that he didn't have a tattoo on his shoulder, the same tattoo several witnesses had described seeing on the suspect. That detail cast new doubt, and once again Christopher Myers was released. Now, years later, after he was caught attacking another woman in North Bay, his name was back on the radar, and this time detectives were sure they had their man. But even with their growing suspicion, they still needed solid proof, evidence that could hold up in court. So, investigators decided to go over his old alibi again. When they re-interviewed the woman who had cleared him years earlier, her story changed slightly. She admitted she had only seen Christopher at home that morning, not in the afternoon as she first thought. That small correction changed everything. Police realized he could have easily ridden his bike to the park, attacked Ardeth, and still made it to work on time. To confirm it, detectives retraced the route themselves on bicycles. The timing fit perfectly. For the first time, they were confident that Christopher Myers had been lying all along. And now, with his recent arrest for another assault, the investigation into Ardeth's murder was about to explode wide open. When detectives confronted Christopher Myers again, they were ready. They had new witnesses, stronger evidence, and a long list of questions. Christopher was now in custody for the attempted assault in North Bay, but Ottawa detectives wanted answers about Ardeth Wood. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he had nothing to do with her death. But when police told him that several women had seen him in the park the day Ardeth disappeared, his story began to change. Christopher admitted that he had been at the park that day and that he had met Ardeth. He said they had talked for a while and then walked together toward the river. Then, according to him, another girl suddenly appeared, startling Ardeth, who slipped and fell into the water. He claimed that when he came back later, she was already dead. He even admitted that he dragged her body to the shore, covered it with branches, and left without telling anyone what had happened. Detectives listened quietly, knowing this story made little sense. There had been no other girl, and no evidence suggested an accidental drowning. Still, this was the first time Christopher had ever admitted to meeting Ardeth that day, a major breakthrough. Even more striking, his story mentioned a detail only the killer would likely know. He said another girl had been nearby and seen them, which matched the account of the 16-year-old witness who told police she heard a scream and saw Ardeth with a man before they disappeared into the woods. It was obvious that Christopher had pieced together his version of events from what he had seen in the news, twisting it to make himself look innocent. Not long after, he changed his story again, this time claiming he had made it all up and had never even been in the park. He said everything he knew about the case came from media reports. To test him, the police gave him a polygraph test, which he failed. Still, Christopher stuck to his denials, and without solid physical evidence, detectives couldn't yet charge him with murder. They decided to dig deeper into his background, to find out who this man really was. What they discovered was disturbing. Christopher's early life had been filled with chaos. His mother drank heavily and used drugs while pregnant, which left him with serious mental and emotional issues from a young age. She also abused him physically until he was about 4 years old, when he was removed from her care and placed with an adoptive family. But even that home couldn't handle him. After 8 years, his adoptive parents gave up custody, saying his behavior had become impossible to manage. He was known to talk to himself, strip naked in public, and have frequent violent outbursts. A psychologist who treated him as a child described him as the scariest kid I've ever met. As an adult, Christopher appeared to live a somewhat normal life. He held jobs, paid rent, and managed to stay out of major trouble, at least most of the time. But his calm exterior hid darker impulses. He was arrested a few times for minor but related crimes, and police later learned from people who knew him that he often struggled to control his temper. One of his ex-girlfriends told investigators that Christopher could be charming at first, but he would quickly become violent and controlling. He had hit her multiple times during their relationship. She also said something that made detectives sit up straight. Christopher often rode his bike around local parks, just as witnesses had described the man in the Ardeth case. Then she revealed the final, chilling detail. He sometimes wore temporary tattoos of an eagle on his shoulder. That single revelation tied everything together. For years, detectives had doubted they had the right man because Christopher claimed he didn't have a tattoo. But now they knew the truth. He had used fake ones that could easily be washed off. The missing piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Still, they needed a confession. And for that, they would need to break him down completely. After years of frustration, investigators were determined to make Christopher Myers finally admit the truth. They had enough circumstantial evidence to connect him to Ardeth Wood's murder, but not enough to convict him. They needed his confession. 5 months after his arrest for the assault in North Bay, police brought him back for another round of questioning. This time, they had a secret weapon, a seasoned British detective known for his ability to get even the most hardened criminals to talk. At first, Christopher repeated his usual story, that he had nothing to do with Ardeth's death. But as the hours dragged on, his confidence began to crack. Eventually, he started telling the same strange story he had told before, that he met Ardeth by the river, kissed her, and that she drowned after being startled by another girl. Then, just as quickly, he took it all back again. Detectives stayed calm. They gave him time, encouraged him to talk, and slowly drew him in. After a while, Christopher grabbed a piece of paper and began drawing a map of the area. He marked where he said he had met Ardeth and where they had supposedly gone together. He even agreed to take the officers there himself. But when they arrived at the park, Christopher suddenly changed his mind again, saying he didn't recognize the area at all. It was another attempt to back out, to twist the truth one more time. Even so, the map and his shifting story were enough to keep him in custody. But the detectives weren't finished. They believed Christopher might be linked not only to Ardeth's murder but also to a string of unsolved sexual assaults in and around Ottawa around the same time. The pattern was nearly identical. A man would approach women on foot or on a bike, start a casual conversation, then suddenly attack and assault them. Investigators contacted the victims and showed them Christopher's photo. Several of them immediately recognized him, saying without hesitation that he was the man who had attacked them. Armed with this new information, police confronted Christopher again. This time, under hours of relentless questioning, he finally broke down. He confessed to 5 different assaults. His own words tied him to a series of brutal attacks that had terrified women across the city. That confession strengthened the murder case against him beyond measure. In the end, prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder for killing Ardeth Wood, along with several counts of sexual assault. The trial process was long and grueling, but in January 2008, Christopher Myers finally accepted a plea deal. The charge was reduced from first-degree to second-degree murder in exchange for his guilty plea. In his confession, he admitted to approaching Ardeth on the bike path, grabbing her, dragging her into the woods, and submerging her in the river, killing her. He also confessed to attacking several other women in separate incidents. Christopher Myers was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. But justice would not come easily for him. When he first applied for parole in 2015, his request was denied immediately. The board ruled that he was still a serious threat to the public. 5 years later, in 2020, he tried again and was rejected once more. Experts agreed that he was still highly likely to reoffend, even after nearly 2 decades behind bars. As of today, Christopher Myers remains in prison. The murder of Ardeth Wood left a lasting scar on Ottawa. For years, women were afraid to walk or bike alone in the city's parks. Community patrols were formed, groups of volunteers walking and riding together to make sure no one else suffered the same fate. Ardeth's story became one of the most haunting cases in Canadian history, a painful reminder of how a single act of cruelty can change an entire community forever. And although her killer is locked away, the fear and heartbreak of that summer day in 2003 still echo in the city she called home. Thank you for watching. Every victim deserves their story told. If you found this story shocking and heartbreaking, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and help keep their memory alive. What do you think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything.